And we'll read a couple of chapters for today. Chapter 6, Sai-Fong. Mario took the IRT local subway downtown. He held the matchbox up at the level of his chest so the cricket could see out. This was the first time Chester had been able to watch where he was going on the subway. The last time he had been buried under roast beef sandwiches. He hung out of the box, gazing up and down the car. Chester was a curious cricket, and as long as he was here in New York, he meant to see as much as he could. He was staring at an old lady wearing a straw hat, wondering if the flowers on it were real, and if they were, what they would taste like, when the train lurched to a halt. Like most people who first ride the subway, Chester wasn't used to the abrupt stops. He toppled out of the matchbox into Mario's lap. The boy picked him up again. "You've got to be careful," he said, putting his finger over the open end of the box so there was just enough room for Chester to poke his head out. At the Canal Street stop, Mario got off and walked over several blocks to Chinatown. Chester craned his head out as far as he could to get his first look at New York by day. The buildings in this part of town weren't nearly as high as they were in Times Square, but they were still high enough to make Chester Cricket feel very small. In Chinatown, as Papa had said, all the shops were closed. Mario walked up and down the narrow curving streets, zigzagging across them so he could look in the windows on both sides. In some cases, he saw the cardboard shells that open up to beautiful paper flowers if you put them in a glass of water. And in others, the glass wind harps that tinkle when they're hung in the window when the breeze catches them. But he couldn't find a cricket cage anywhere. Down at the end of the alley, there was an especially old shop. The paint was peeling off the doors, and the windows were crammed with years and years' collection of knickknacks. A sign hanging out in front said, Sai-Fong, Chinese Novelties, and printed underneath in smaller letters was, also do hand laundry. Sitting cross-legged on the doorstep was an old Chinese man. He was wearing a silk vest over his shirt with dragons embroidered on it in red thread, and he was smoking a long clay pipe. Mario stopped and looked in the shop window. The old Chinese man didn't turn his head, but he looked slyly at the boy out of the corner of his eyes. Slowly, he drew the pipe out of his mouth and blew a puff of smoke into the air. "Are you Mr. Fong?" asked Mario. The man smoothly twisted his head as if it were on a pivot and looked at Mario. "I am Sai-Fong," he answered. His voice sounded as high and dry as a cricket's chirping. "I would like to buy a cricket cage if you have any," said Mario. Sai-Fong put the pipe back in his mouth and took a few puffs. His eyes narrowed. "You've got a cricket?" he finally asked in a voice so soft that Mario could hardly hear it. "Yes," said Mario, "here he is." He opened the matchbox. Chester and Sai-Fong looked at each other. "Oh, very good," said Sai-Fong, and a remarkable change came over him. He suddenly became very lively, almost dancing a jig on the sidewalk. "You've got a cricket! Very good! You've got a cricket!" He was laughing delightedly. Mario was startled by Sai-Fong's quick change. I want to get him a house," he said. "Come in my shop, please," said Sai-Fong. He opened the door and they both went in. Mario had never seen such a cluttered room. It was a jumble of odds and ends. Everything from silk kimonos to chopsticks to packages of hand laundry littered the shelves and the chairs. And there was a faint, sweet smell of incense in the air. Saifong brushed a pile of Chinese newspapers onto the floor. You sit here, please, he said, motioning Mario to the chair he had cleared. I'll be back soon. And he disappeared through a door to the back of the shop. Mario sat very quietly. He was afraid if he moved, he would be buried under an avalanche of novelties. In a glass case right in front of him were a row of Chinese goddesses carved in ivory. They all had the strangest smile on their lips, as if they knew something that nobody else did, and they seemed to be staring straight at Mario. He tried to look at them, but he couldn't keep it up and had to look away. In a few minutes, Saifong came back into the room. He was carrying a cricket cage in the shape of a pagoda. There were 7 tiers to it, each one a little smaller than the one below, and it ended in a slender spire. The lower parts of the cage were painted red and green, but the spire was golden. At one side was a gate with a tiny latch on it. Mario wanted to own the cage so much that he tingled all over, but it looked awfully expensive. Saifong held up the first finger of his right hand and said solemnly, This is a very ancient cricket cage. Once a cricket who belonged to the emperor of all China lived in this cage. You know the story of the first cricket? No, sir, said Mario. Very good, said Saifong. I will tell. He set the cage down and took the clay pipe out of his pocket. When it was lit and a thread of smoke was curling up from the bowl, he used the pipe to emphasize what he said, drawing little designs, like Chinese characters, in the air. Long ago, in the beginning of time, there were no crickets. But there was a very wise man who knew all things. This man was named Chpt, and he spoke only the truth. All secrets were open to him. He knew the thoughts of animals and men. He knew the desire of flowers and trees. He knew the destiny of the sun and stars. The entire world was a single page for him to read. And the high gods who lived in the palace at the summit of heaven loved Chpt because of the truth he spoke. Now, from many lands came men to hear their fate. To one he would say, You are a very good man. You will live as long as the cedar tree on the mountainside. To another he would say, You are a wicked man. You will die soon. Goodbye. But to all men he only spoke the truth. Of course, wicked men were most unhappy to hear what he said. They thought, I am a wicked man. Now everyone knows how wicked I am. So all together, the wicked men decided to kill Chpt. Chpt knew very well they wanted to kill him. He knew everything, but he did not care. Within his heart, like the smell of sweetness within the lotus blossom, Chpt had peace, and so he wait. But the high gods who lived in the palace at the summit of heaven would not let him be killed. More precious to them than kings was this one man who only spoke the truth. So when the wicked men came to kill him, the high gods changed him into a cricket. And the man who spoke only truth and knew all things now sings songs that no man understands and that all men love. But the high gods understand, and they smile. For them, the beautiful sound of the cricket is the song of one who still speaks the truth and knows all things. Fong stopped speaking and smoked his pipe silently. Mario, too, sat still, looking at the cricket cage. He was thinking about the story and about how much he wanted that cricket cage. In his matchbox, Chester Cricket had listened carefully. He was very touched by the tale. Of course, he couldn't tell if it was true, but he sort of believed it, because he personally had always thought that there was more to his song than just chirping. As usual, when he didn't know what else to do, he rubbed one wing across the other. A single clear note sounded throughout the shop. Fong lifted his head. A smile curled up the end of his ancient lips. So, he whispered, Cricket understood. He puffed on his pipe a few more times. Mario wanted to ask him how much the cage cost, but he was afraid. Because your cricket is so remarkable, said Fong, I will sell the cage for 15 cents. Mario sighed with relief. He could afford that. In his pocket, he found a nickel and a dime. That was all that was left of his weekly allowance, which was a quarter. I'll take it, Mr. Fong, he said, and handed Fong the money. I will also make the cricket a present, said Fong. He went behind the counter and took a little bell, no bigger than a honeybee, out of a drawer. With a piece of thread, he hung it up inside the cage. Mario put Chester into the cage, and the cricket jumped up and knocked against the bell. It tinkled faintly. It sounds like the littlest bell in the silver temple far up the Yangtze River, said Fong. Mario thanked him for the bell and the story and everything. As he was about to leave the shop, Fong said, Would you like a fortune cookie? I guess so, said Mario. I've never had one. Fong took down a can from the shelf. It was full of fortune cookies, thin wafers that had been folded so there was an airspace in each one. Mario bit into a cookie and found a piece of paper inside. He said he read what it said out loud. Good luck is coming your way. Be ready. Ah, laughed Fong. Very good advice. Go home now, but always be ready for happiness. Chapter 7. The Cricket Cage. That same night, after the Bellinis had gone home, Chester was telling Harry and Tucker about his trip to Chinatown. The cat and the mouse were sitting on the shelf outside, and Chester Cricket was crouched under the bell in the cage. Every minute or so, Tucker would get up and walk around to the other side of the pagoda. He was overcome with admiration for it. And Mr. Fong gave Mario a fortune cookie, too, Chester was saying. I'm very fond of Chinese food myself, said Harry Cat. I often browse through the garbage cans down in Chinatown. Tucker Mouse stopped gaping at the cricket cage long enough to say, Once I thought about living down there. I decided to stay away, though. A low rumble of a chuckle came from Harry Cat's throat. Listen to the mouse, he said, and gave Tucker a pat on the back that sent him rolling over and over. Easy, Harry, easy, said Tucker, picking himself up. You don't know your own strength. He stood up on his hind legs and looked in through the red-painted bars of the cage. What a palace, he murmured. Beautiful. You could feel like a king living in a place like this. Yes, said Chester, but I'm not so keen on staying in a cage. I'm more used to tree stumps and holes in the ground. It makes me sort of nervous to be locked in here. Do you want to come out? Asked Harry. He sprung one of his nails out of the pad of his right forepaw and lifted the latch of the gate to the cage. Chester pushed the gate, and it swung open. He jumped out. "Oh, it's a relief to be free," he said, jumping around the shelf. "There's nothing like freedom." "Say, Chester," said Tucker, "could I go in for a minute? I never was in a pagoda before." "Go right ahead," said Chester. Tucker scrambled through the cage into the inside and pranced all around. He lay down, first on one side, then on the other, and then on his back. "If only I had a kimono now," he said, standing up on his hind legs again and resting one paw on a bar. "I feel like the Emperor of China. How do I look, Harry?" "You look like a mouse in a trap," said Harry Cat. "Every mouse should have a trap so nice," said Tucker Mouse. "Do you want to sleep in the cage?" asked Chester. "Oh, could I?" exclaimed the mouse. His idea of luxury was to spend a night in such surroundings. "Sure," said Chester. "I prefer the matchbox anyway." "There's only one thing," said Tucker, stamping with his left hind leg. "This floor, it's a little hard to sleep on." "I'll go over and get a bunch of paper from the drain pipe," volunteered Harry Cat. "Nah, that'll make a mess," said Tucker. "We don't want Chester in trouble with the Bellinis." He hesitated. "Oh, maybe we could find something here." "How about a piece of Kleenex?" suggested Chester. "That's nice and soft." "Kleenex would be good," said Tucker. "But I was wondering—" He paused again. "Come on, Tucker," said Harry Cat. "You've got something on your mind. Let's have it." "Well," Tucker began, "I sort of thought that if there were any dollar bills in the cash register—" Harry burst out laughing. "You might know," he said to Chester. "Who but this mouse would want to sleep on dollar bills?" Chester jumped into the cash register drawer, which was open as usual. "Well, there's a few dollars in here," he called up. "Plenty to make a mattress," said Tucker Mouse. "Pass some in, please." Chester passed the first dollar bill up to Harry Cat, who took it over to the cage and reached it through the gate. Tucker took hold of one end of the bill and shook it out like a blanket. It was old and rumply and soft. "Careful you don't rip it," said Harry. "I won't rip it," said Tucker. "This is one mouse who knows the value of a dollar." Harry brought over the second bill. It was newer and stiffer than the first. Let me see," said Tucker. He lifted a corner of each bill, one in either paw. "This newer one can go on the bottom. I like a crispy, clean sheet. And then I'll pull the old one over for a cover. Now a pillow is what I need. Please look more in the cash register." Harry and Chester searched the compartments of the open drawer. There was a little loose change, but not much else. "How about a 50-cent piece?" said Harry. "Too flat," answered Tucker Mouse. The rear half of the drawer was still inside the cash register. Chester crawled back. It was dark, and he couldn't see where he was going. He felt around until his head bumped into something. Whatever it was, it seemed to be big and round. Chester pushed and shoved and finally got it back into the dim light of the newsstand. It was one of Mama Bellini's earrings, shaped like a seashell, with sparkling little stones all over it. "Would an earring do?" he shouted up to Tucker. "Well, I don't know," said Tucker. "It looks as if it was covered with diamonds," said Harry Cat. It's perfect, called Tucker. Send it up. Harry carefully lifted the earring into the cage. Tucker examined it like a jeweler. I think these are fake diamonds, he said at last. Well, yes, but it's still very pretty, said Chester, who had jumped up beside them. Well, I guess it'll do, said Tucker. He lay down on his side on the new dollar bill, rested his head on the earring, and pulled the old dollar up over him. Chester and Harry heard him draw in a deep breath of contentment. I'm sleeping on money in a palace, he said. It's a dream come true. Harry Cat purred his chuckle. Good night, Chester, he said. I'm going back to the drain pipe where I can stretch out. He jumped to the floor. Night, Harry, Chester called. Soft and silent as a shadow, Harry slipped out of the opening in the side of the newsstand and glided over to the drain pipe. Chester hopped into his matchbox. He had gotten to like the feeling of the Kleenex. It was almost like the spongy wood of his old tree stump, and felt much more like home than the cricket cage. Now everyone had their own place to sleep. Good night, Tucker, Chester called. Night, Chester, Tucker answered. Chester Cricket burrowed down deeper into the Kleenex. He was beginning to enjoy life in New York City. Just before he fell asleep, he heard Tucker Mouse sighing happily in the cricket cage. And tomorrow we will continue with Chapter 8. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks, guys. Have a good afternoon, and we'll keep you updated on how we're going to do this. We'll do Zoom again or on Facebook Live.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.